When the well-known liberal student debater, Emily Carter, stepped onto the stage, she was convinced her fierce ideology would overpower every opposing voice. Little did she know, Barron Trump was about to deliver the most devastating reality check of her life. But before we get into it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The prestigious debate forum had gathered the brightest young minds from universities across America. All day long, passionate discussions had filled the auditorium, but no one could have anticipated what was about to unfold during the open debate session, where any student could step up to speak and others could challenge them. The atmosphere buzzed with intellectual energy as Emily Carter, well known for her aggressive debating style, confidently strode up to the podium. Her purple hair reflected her fiery personality as she adjusted the microphone, a slight smirk tugging at her lips. "Fellow students," she began, her voice sharp and commanding, "we're here to discuss progress, but there's a major issue we need to address. The suffocating grip of outdated generations on our nation's future." The room fell silent. Some students shifted uneasily in their seats, while others leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "Just look around," Emily continued, her voice growing bolder. "While we struggle with modern challenges, people over 50 still control our destiny. These traditionalists cling to their outdated values." She paused. Their so-called faith, their so-called patriotism, their rigid family structures. Scattered applause broke out, encouraging her to go even further. In the third row, a tall, well-dressed young man sat still, his expression unreadable. Few recognized him as Barron Trump, who had quietly observed the debates all day. "These people," Emily's voice dripped with disdain, "these boomers, who can barely operate a smartphone, are somehow still making decisions about our future. They've had their time. It's time we admit their generation is holding us back from real progress." The applause grew louder, nearly drowning out the few murmurs of dissent. Emily's eyes gleamed with triumph as she prepared to make her most controversial point yet. "What we need," she declared, her voice rising with conviction, "is an age limit on political participation. Why should someone who won't even be alive to witness the consequences of their choices have any say in our future?" The crowd's reaction intensified. Many students were now standing, cheering her on. These people, Emily's voice was electric with passion. Their obsession with God and guns, their Make America Great Again nostalgia, she made air quotes with her fingers, they're dinosaurs. Their America is dead, and it's time we bury it. Thunderous applause erupted. Feeding off the crowd's energy, Emily became even bolder with each statement. "Their so-called values," she scoffed. "Family values, traditional values. These are just code words for resistance to progress. These people built their wealth on privilege and oppression, and now they want to lecture us about morality." In the third row, Barron Trump still hadn't moved. His jaw tightened, just slightly. Around him, students nodded enthusiastically, some even shouting words of agreement. "I propose," Emily's voice cut through the noise, "that we start a movement to restrict voting rights and political office positions to those under 50. Let's be real," she paused, scanning the crowd. "They had their chance. They messed it up. Now, it's our turn." The professor moderating the debate, Dr. Harrison, stepped forward, concern written all over his face. "Does anyone wish to present a counter-argument?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the roaring applause. Emily crossed her arms, a look of satisfaction on her face. The room began to quiet. Students glanced around, wondering if anyone would dare challenge such a powerful presentation. "Anyone?" Dr. Harrison asked again, already reaching for his papers to move on. That's when a deep, clear voice cut through the silence. "I would." The room went dead silent. All heads turned toward the voice. Emily's smirk widened as Barron Trump rose from his seat. "Well, well," she drawled into the microphone. "Look who finally decided to grace us with his opinion. Daddy's boy himself." Scattered laughter rippled through the audience. But Barron's composed demeanor never wavered as he made his way toward the podium. His tall frame and impeccably tailored suit stood out against the casual atmosphere of the debate hall. Emily stepped aside, making an exaggerated sweeping gesture toward the microphone. "Go ahead, Donald's pet," she sneered. "Defend your boomer buddies. This should be entertaining." Barron adjusted the microphone, his movements slow and deliberate. The audience held its breath, many expecting him to falter under Emily's notorious debate tactics. But instead, he smiled. Not a smirk, but a genuine, almost sympathetic expression. "Thank you for your passionate presentation, Emily," he began, his voice steady and measured. "But passion without wisdom? It's like a ship without a rudder, powerful, yet dangerous." Emily's smile wavered for just a moment. She hadn't expected this. A calm, articulate response. "You speak of progress," Barron continued, his gaze unwavering. "But real progress isn't about tearing down those who came before us. It's built upon their shoulders." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. "When you say that anyone over 50 shouldn't have a say in our future, do you realize? You're talking about the very people who created the technology you use to research your arguments." Emily started to interject, but Barron raised a hand, his tone never shifting from one of respect. "Please. You had your turn. I listened carefully to every word." The audience stirred. They weren't used to seeing Emily held in check so gracefully. Now, Barron's voice deepened, carrying an unmistakable resonance. "Let's talk about what real progress looks like," he continued. "You mentioned smartphones?" A hint of amusement flickered in his voice. "Did you know that many of the key innovations in your iPhone were developed by people who are now in their 60s and 70s? The same boomers you want to silence." Emily rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. That's ancient history." "Speaking of history," Barron smoothly cut in, his voice cool and composed, "let's address your claim that their America is dead." Now, beneath his polished exterior, a hint of steel crept into his tone. "The America they built? It provides the very platform you're standing on right now to attack them." He took a step forward, his voice unwavering. "The universities we study in? Built by them. The prosperity that allows us to debate ideas rather than fight for survival? Created by them. And the very freedom to stand here and speak your mind, without fear? Protected by them." The audience, now fully locked onto Barron, hung onto his every word. Even some of Emily's most vocal supporters had begun nodding thoughtfully. "But they don't understand modern problems." Emily shot back, her voice rising with frustration. "Really?" Barron raised an eyebrow. "The generation that lived through the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, multiple economic crises, and the birth of the digital age doesn't understand complex issues." He paused, letting the moment settle. "They've solved problems we haven't even learned about yet." Emily's face reddened. "But their values. Their values." Barron's voice carried a quiet intensity. "You mean things like hard work, personal responsibility, and respect for others? The very values that built the greatest nation on earth." He gestured toward the room. "Take a look around. Everything you see, from the chairs you're sitting on to the democratic system that allows us to even have this debate, was built by people who upheld those values." A murmur spread through the crowd, students exchanging glances. Emily's supporters were growing noticeably quieter. "But here's what really concerns me," Barron continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "In the name of progress, you're advocating for one of the most regressive policies imaginable: discrimination, based purely on age." He tilted his head slightly. "Isn't it ironic? You claim to fight for inclusion, yet you're calling for the exclusion of millions of American citizens." Emily's composure was cracking. She hadn't expected this level of articulate opposition. "Let me simplify it even more," Barron said, confidence growing with every word. "Let's look at some of these outdated people you think should be silenced. Elon Musk, over 50. Bill Gates, over 60. The scientists working on cancer research, many over 50. The professors who teach us, most over 50. My father, 78. He let each name sink in. "So tell me, should we dismiss all of their contributions because of their age?" "Oh, how touching," Emily sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The privileged heir lectures us on innovation and hard work." She turned to the crowd with a dramatic flourish. "Notice how he conveniently brings up billionaires, the elite 1% hoarding wealth while real Americans struggle." Several students nodded in agreement. Emily was regaining her confidence. "And since you brought up your father," she added, her tone sharp, "let's talk about the values you're so proud of. The same values that divide families, that tell people who they can and can't love, that shove outdated religious beliefs down our throats." "Interesting," Barron interjected calmly. "You claim to champion diversity, yet you mock people's faith? Because their faith oppresses others." Emily shot back, her voice rising. "Traditional values," she practically spat the words. "They're just tools of control." Then, jabbing a finger at Barron, "And you're just another trust fund baby defending a system that keeps you on top." The crowd roared again, many students cheering Emily's attack. But Barron's composed smile never wavered. "Let's examine that claim," he said, his voice slicing through the noise. "You say these values are tools of control, and yet these same values taught millions to fight for civil rights, to help their neighbors, to build communities." His gaze locked onto Emily. "My trust fund? I've been volunteering at veteran shelters since I was 14. He took a step forward. "Tell me, Emily, how many hours have you spent helping others?" Silence. Emily's triumphant expression faltered. "But that's not," she started. "Not what you meant." Barron finished for her, his voice unwavering. "It never is it? When the facts don't fit the narrative, you switch to personal attacks. A classic debate tactic. One used when someone was losing." "Don't you dare!" Emily's voice cracked with rage. Storming toward the podium, purple hair wild, she jabbed a finger in the air. "You think you can stand up here, with your suit and your manners and your privilege, and lecture us about values?" The tension in the room was electric. Some students were now on their feet, feeding off Emily's fury. "You want to talk about helping others?" She practically spat. "Your family represents everything wrong with this country. The elite, the privileged, hiding behind traditional values while real Americans suffer." She turned to the crowd, her voice reaching a fever pitch. "Look at him, standing there like he belongs here, defending the very system that keeps us down." Then, spinning back to Barron, eyes blazing. "You know what?" She pointed directly at him, her face contorted with fury. "This freak doesn't even deserve to be here." The words echoed through the room. Silence. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, alarm clear on his face. But Barron raised a hand. "It's okay, Professor," he said quietly, his composure unshaken. Then, turning to Emily with an almost sympathetic smile, "You know what's interesting, Emily?" His voice was steady. "When facts fail you, you resort to shouting. When logic doesn't work, you turn to insults. And when reason falls short—" He paused, letting the moment stretch. "You show everyone exactly who you really are." Emily's face burned red. "I'm showing everyone the truth about people like you," she shot back. "No." Barron's voice was firm, yet gentle. "You're showing everyone what happens when hatred disguises itself as progress. You claim to fight discrimination, yet you discriminate. You preach tolerance, yet you show none. You demand respect, while disrespecting millions of Americans who built this country." The audience sat in absolute stillness now, hanging on his every word. "But let me tell you what I see," Barron continued, his voice carrying a quiet strength that commanded attention. "I see someone so blinded by ideology that she's forgotten a simple truth." He took a step forward. "Every generation stands on the shoulders of the ones before it." Emily tried to interrupt, but her voice lacked the confidence it held earlier. "You're twisting my—" "I'm quoting you directly," Barron replied smoothly. "You called our elders dinosaurs. You mocked their faith. You ridiculed their sacrifices. And why?" His eyes locked onto hers. "Because they don't share your worldview?" He let the question linger. "That's not progress, Emily. That's prejudice." Then he turned, addressing the entire room. "And all of you," his gaze swept across the audience, "you just witnessed something remarkable. You saw someone claim to champion diversity while attacking diversity of thought. Someone who demands inclusion while calling for the exclusion of millions. Someone who preaches tolerance." His voice sharpened, while showing absolute intolerance for beliefs different from her own. Emily's face had lost all color. Even her most vocal supporters were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "But here's the most ironic part," Barron continued, his tone now carrying genuine concern. "While you stand here, demanding that we silence our elders," he gestured to the room, "you're benefiting from their legacy. The very platform you're using to attack them, built by them. The freedoms you're exercising, protected by them. The education you're receiving, made possible by them." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The silence in the room was deafening. Then, in a voice almost gentle, Barron asked, "So tell me, Emily, in your vision of progress, is there room for anyone who disagrees with you?" He tilted his head slightly. "Or is diversity only acceptable when it fits your narrative?" Emily opened her mouth, but for the first time since the debate began, no words came out. "What I find most fascinating," Barron said, his voice carrying both authority and compassion, "is that while you claim to fight for the future, you're making the oldest mistake in history, believing that wisdom belongs to just one group." Emily's fierce demeanor was cracking, her hands gripping the podium, knuckles white. "You see," Barron continued, "true progress isn't about silencing voices, it's about learning from them. Every generation thinks they know better than the last." He let the words sink in. "And every generation eventually realizes just how much they still had to learn." The room was completely still. Students who had once cheered Emily's attacks now sat in thoughtful silence. "Those boomers you mock," his voice softened, yet somehow became even more powerful. "They were once young idealists, too. They fought for civil rights, questioned authority, demanded change. But along the way, they learned something valuable. He paused, scanning the room. That lasting progress comes from building bridges, not burning them. Emily's shoulders slumped slightly. The fire in her eyes flickered, replaced by something else, the first glimmer of understanding. "So here's my suggestion," Barron said, his voice gentle yet firm. "Instead of trying to silence the voices of experience, why don't we listen to them?" He took a step back. "You might be surprised by just how much they understand about change. After all, they've lived through more of it than we ever have." With quiet dignity, he stepped away from the podium and returned to his seat, leaving Emily standing there, alone with the weight of his words. After Barron's powerful conclusion, Emily quietly returned to her seat. The debate continued, though the energy in the room had shifted. Students who spoke afterward seemed more measured, more thoughtful in their approach. Nearly an hour later, as Dr. Harrison was about to close the session, Emily's hand rose, tentatively, into the air. "Yes, Miss Carter?" The professor's voice was wary, clearly concerned about reopening the earlier conflict. Emily hesitated. May I speak one more time?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, nothing like the confident tone she had started with. Several students exchanged nervous glances. Dr. Harrison hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "Briefly, please." Emily stood. Her steps were uncertain. Gone was the fierce debater who had commanded the stage earlier. This was someone else. Someone who had been profoundly shaken. I need to say something," she began, her voice trembling. "Earlier today I stood here, full of arrogance, attacking the very foundations of our society and disrespecting the millions of Americans who built everything we have." She took a shaky breath. "I was wrong." The room was silent. "I never imagined that Barron Trump would be the one to show me what true wisdom looks like," she admitted. "That someone I was ready to dismiss would be the one to teach me about real inclusivity and compassion." Her voice faltered. "I'm sorry to everyone I offended, to the generations I disrespected." She swallowed hard. "I was blind, and today my eyes were opened." Without waiting for a response, she turned, quickly leaving the podium and slipping out of the auditorium. Later that evening, as students were filing out of the building, Emily spotted Barron gathering his things. Her heart pounded as she approached him, hesitant, expecting to be met with the same disdain she had once shown him. "Barron." Her voice was small, uncertain. Could I talk to you for a moment?" He turned. To her surprise, there was no trace of anger or resentment in his expression. Instead, he smiled. A warm, genuine smile. "Of course." Emily hesitated. "I just wanted to say." She struggled to find the right words. "I'm so sorry for everything I said, for how I acted." Barron tilted his head slightly, considering her words. "You know what's interesting about being our age," he said thoughtfully. "We're old enough to have strong convictions, but young enough to sometimes let those convictions blind us." Emily blinked. "It's actually pretty normal to get caught up in ideologies and passionate beliefs," Barron continued. "And that's exactly why the wisdom of older generations is so valuable. They've been exactly where we are." Emily stared at him, taken aback by his kindness. How are you so wise about all this?" she asked, almost in awe. Barron smiled. "I've had good teachers." He exhaled, looking around the now empty room. "People who taught me that true strength isn't about winning arguments, it's about building understanding." He met her gaze. "Our elders have seen these same battles, felt these same certainties, learned these same lessons." His voice softened. "We don't have to agree with everyone, but we do need to respect their journey." Overwhelmed by his kindness, Emily suddenly stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him. For a moment, Barron seemed surprised. Then, he returned the embrace, with gentle understanding. As they parted, they both knew. This wasn't just about winning or losing a debate. It was about something far more important. The moment when wisdom overcame pride, and understanding conquered division. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more inspiring tales that celebrate the values that make this country great. Thanks for watching. God bless you, and God bless America.